depending on where you are in the country. We'd like to welcome you to today's webinar presented by the Cedar Center on Learning to Teach, Practice-Based Opportunities Within Teacher Education. We have with us today Amber Benedict, who is a visiting faculty member at the University of Florida and a TA provider with the Cedar Center. Dr. Mary Brownell, the Cedar Center's director and an expert in teacher preparation and professional development. Lynn Holt-Heide, who is a member of the Cedar Center leadership team and is a deputy director for the GTL Center. And Louise Spears-Swerling, a faculty member and expert in teacher preparation and literacy at Southern Connecticut University. If you have questions throughout the presentation today, please feel free to enter your question in the chat pod, and our presenters will be glad to answer those as we go along. And there's a designated question and answer period as well. If you have any issues with the technology today, please go ahead and send a message to the Cedar, is it the Cedar Center on here, Matt?
Yeah, you can just type a question in the chat pod, whether it's content or technology based, and we'll answer it.
And we'll assist you with that today. Without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Lynn.
Thank you, Erica. I appreciate that introduction. If you could just go to the next slide, Matt. So, first of all, thank you all for joining us today. We're always excited to have our colleagues join us to talk about an important topic like we feel this one is. I wanted to kind of kick off today to start off with framing what the purpose of today is. And you can see on the objectives that are listed, I believe it's on the next slide. I'm seeing the disclaimer slide right now, Matt. But we wanted to talk about what are practice-based opportunities, and then most importantly, how do we ensure that the essential features are included to make them high quality, to ensure that all practice-based opportunities that are provided to teacher candidates within campus-based coursework and field experiences, that they lead to high quality practice with feedback, coaching, etc. We also wanted to give you some real life example of how do you integrate these within your courses and field experiences to ensure that candidates exit the program prepared and learner ready. We're going to start off the first piece to get an idea who is on with us today. So Matt, if you could put up the first participant poll, we can get a feel for who's here, so that way we can start to tailor our discussion accordingly. I'm not sure if it's just my screen, but Matt, I am seeing just the disclaimer screen. Are you able to pull up the polling question?
It seems, Lynn, like people are participating in the poll right now that's up.
Okay. I can't see it for some reason, so I'm going to trust that it's up, and I'm going to keep going to the next screen, and then we can come back to the results of the polling question if that works, Matt.
Okay, I'll give like about 10 more seconds on the poll because 80% of people have voted, and then I will close it and we can go on to the next one.
Wonderful. Well, as we're waiting to close it out, on the slide that has Cedar and GTL at the top, as Erica mentioned before, I'm Lynn Holt-Heide, and I represent, or get the opportunity to represent, both the Cedar Center and the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders. Many of you who are probably participating today are very familiar with the Cedar Center and know that we are working with 20 states to work in preparing, strengthening the preparation of general ed and special ed teachers as well as leaders in serving students with disabilities. The GTL Center, which many of you may or may not be familiar with, is also a federally funded center that receives funding from the Office of Special Education Programs as well. And that center is designed to support state education agencies in really ensuring that there are high quality teachers and leaders in every classroom. So you can clearly see that both of these centers have deep investments and resources and support to support all states, teachers, etc., in ensuring that we have teachers that are prepared and that all students have equitable access to an effective teacher. I saw briefly on my screen, and I'm not sure what's going on with my screen, but I did see briefly the polling results. Matt, do you mind, or Erica, do you mind just sharing out who do we have on, since I can't see the results at the moment?
Sure, Lynn. 38% of the poll respondents are here to learn how to integrate practice-based opportunities into coursework or fieldwork. 28% for innovative strategies others use to fully integrate practice-based opportunities. 18% have roles that the DOE want to know more about the roles the DOE can play in integrating practice-based opportunities into education provider programs. 12% are here to find out what practice-based opportunities are, and 3% indicated wanting to know more about the role of local districts in creating high-quality practice-based opportunities.
Great, great. I am glad to see that, and it seems that many of you probably know what practice-based opportunities are, but really want to get deep into the weeds about how to integrate them in effectively into coursework. So let's jump ahead and get to the meat of the webinar. The practice-based opportunities are just basically providing candidates an opportunity to integrate both content and pedagogy that they learn through coursework and other learning experiences into practice, so that they have an opportunity to practice, say, evidence-based practices in literacy instruction or math, and that they're provided different ways to practice and opportunities for feedback and coaching. Recognizing this need, as I mentioned earlier, the Cedar Center and the GTL Center came together to create a brief. The brief is called Learning to Teach, on the next slide, and how to integrate practice-based opportunities within teacher education. And throughout this webinar, you're going to hear a little bit about what are the essential features of practice-based opportunities. And on the next slide, if you could forward it, Matt, you can see some of the essential features, and a little bit later, Amber, our colleague, is going to review what are those essential features. And it also goes through some practical examples of how this is integrated within teacher preparation coursework. So at the top here on the slide, you see the modeling, spaced learning, varied learning opportunities, et cetera. And what you see there are the essential features that we would say are very critically important to the science on learning and adult learning. And also integrated within this brief, we included a framework so that if you are indeed interested, which it sounds like many of you are, interested in integrating these within your coursework, you could do so by going through this framework. And it basically walks you through a process for assessing what is currently happening within your courses, as well as ensuring that you are hitting the essential features of practice-based opportunities. We've had several states that are already engaged in using this within their prep programs, and we would like to share a little bit about that as well. All right, next slide. We have one polling question that Matt will put up on the screen, but basically wanted to know, from your perspective and in your various roles, it looks like we have some state education agency staff here, some local districts, as well as preparation program faculty. Do you feel like practice-based opportunities should be a required feature of teacher preparation coursework? And as you're responding to that, I also wanted to just talk a little bit about the essential need for us to be collaborative partners in this investment around practice-based opportunities. I think in order for these opportunities to be of high quality, it needs to be a shared collaboration across all partners, and that would be educator preparation programs, the faculty, of course, as well as local districts, and even the state education agency. I think all of them play an important role to creating the kind of partnerships that are needed to ensure that candidates are provided the type of skills and opportunities to practice those that they're going to need in those districts, that they have opportunities for high quality field experiences. And really where the state can come in is really to play a role in setting the infrastructure to allow this to happen. So maybe it's through program approval and requiring practice-based opportunities to be integrated within, or perhaps it's from an angle of, encouraging and incentivizing the partnerships. Oftentimes through program approval or CAPE accreditation, we're looking at partnerships coming from the end of the educator preparation program. But that's really only one side of the equation. We need local districts to be equally invested and have shared accountability in creating the type of practice-based opportunities to ensure candidates are indeed learner ready. So one last thing, the poll results, glad to see 94% have indicated that we feel like this should be a required feature. There was a few that said not sure and some that said no. And if you are inclined, if you wouldn't mind sharing some of that in your chat box, then we can report out later and maybe have a little bit of a discussion about why we're not quite sure or why we're a little bit hesitant. It might be because it seems like a hard challenge. We don't have enough field experiences, but I'm hoping what you will learn today is that it doesn't always take a local partnership and a field experience to apply what you've learned through practice-based opportunities. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Mary.
Matt, could you move to the slide on practice? Go forward. Right there. That's great. Good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be talking to you about this today. At the end of the session, I would like to share a couple thoughts about setting up partnerships. I do want to come back to that important question. I always think it's important to talk about the why of what we're doing, and I think it's good to be thinking about today that the issues that I'm bringing up about why practice is important are important for teachers, for leaders, for any professional, but they're also important to communicate to our teacher candidates and our practicing teachers, because these same principles apply for educating students in our schools. It's important to know that practice accounts for about 20 to 30% of the variance in performance. So it's the difference, it's the amount of difference between being experienced and then being an experienced expert. There's a reason for it. There are other factors that contribute that are not practice opportunities, like working memory, cognition, and I'm not going to get into that because we can influence a good portion of people's skill in the field through practice. So if you could move to the next slide, Matt. There's a reason that effective practice is why it works, and I like this picture because it sort of tells the story of why it works. The picture on the left is a picture of synapses, and it made me think about the acquisition of knowledge. And the picture on the bottom is a picture of a teacher practicing with their students. So the kind of knowledge that expert and effective teachers and other professionals have is not just acquired through books, it's also acquired by applying their knowledge in settings, because that's when they learn to recognize patterns and respond to them, and that's how they learn how to be flexible with the routines and ideas that they've used. So Matt, if you go to the next slide. Let me talk just a little bit about experts and what makes them seem so fluent in their knowledge. Experts, when you watch them, it almost seems like what they're doing is magic because they're so effortless in applying their knowledge, but that's not really what's the case. Over time, they've acquired a lot of formal knowledge and keen perception of when to apply that knowledge in the field. And through experience, they've amassed all these recognitions of many situations and how to respond successfully. And it's really the equivalent of why we talk about decoding, efficiency, and reading. They're able to free up their thinking to problem solve because they can execute so many of their routines efficiently, and they can also recognize, they have enough space in their head to recognize when a situation is just a little bit novel and not like other situations they've seen, and they need to start thinking about doing something differently. Here's a really great example, Matt, as you move to the next slide, of an expert. So I don't know how many of you follow hockey. I'm not a hockey fan, but I do know who Wayne Gretzky was. And so when he was asked about the secret to his success, he did what experts often do, and expert teachers will do this too. I don't know, I just know where the puck is going to be. Although he can't explain what he knows and where to go, it's not some innate clairvoyant ability, but it's rather the result of thousands of hours of deliberate practice, years of experience, and the use of appropriate cognitive processes. So it seems like intuition, but it really isn't. And so when we say some teachers is just born, they really aren't. They probably have had very effective educational experiences before they started to teach, and they're actually drawing on those, and that's what makes them seem unlike a novice, which I want to talk about next. So Matt, could you go to the next slide? Novices are really prisoners of their own lack of experience, and so they're inflexible. They are not good problem solvers. We actually should not expect them to be good problem solvers because it's developmentally not an appropriate expectation. And so here's why they're prisoners of their own knowledge. They have a lot of knowing that. They know facts and rules and the kinds of information you gain in school and trainings and conferences, but they're pretty inflexible and deliberate when they apply it. So you'll see them hanging on to a script. We actually should expect that they might hang on to a script because they don't have the experience, and so they have no choice but to relatively be inflexible. Matt, could you go on to the next slide? But in initial preparation, and this is important, we need to think about the fact that we're not preparing experts, but I think we do want something called an advanced beginning expert, and this is why practice-based opportunities are important. So if you could go to the next slide, Matt, I'll talk a little bit about advanced beginners. As advanced beginners spend more time with the students, so as teachers in their preparation program spend more time with children, they start to recognize similarities across their different teaching situations. And they start to rely less on rule-driven behavior. But remember, though, they're still somewhat rule-driven. So we have to, one of the important things that in working with them is we have to start to develop realistic expectations of what they're going to be like. When they start applying these rules, they begin to develop what's called strategic knowledge. So they know when to ignore the rules, when to bend them, when to finesse the routine, because they're becoming very effective from the experiences they're having with the children, and they're getting feedback on their performance with those students. So let me just give you an example, because you might be surprised, but most of this research, not most of it, but a good amount of this research comes from athletics. So here's a good example of a novice coach who's becoming an advanced beginner. The coach is doing an analysis of a movie of plays, and there's kids in the back, some athletes in the back that are talking. Rather than disrupting the flow of the lesson and talking to the players like a novice might do immediately, the advanced beginner waits to talk to them at the end, because they know that stopping the behavior right at that point in time could be disruptive to the flow of the lesson. So how do we move then to a practice-based approach? If you could go to the next slide, Matt. I think it's important, as I said, that we have to think about how to create these practice opportunities, even in our coursework, because this is when candidates start to figure out how to apply their knowledge and skills and how to start to gain some flexibility with it. And I want to put out 3 key ideas about why, additional ideas about why this is important. So if you could go to the next slide, Matt, and then go to the next slide. One is that we can decompose practice. And just as a fun activity for yourself, you might want to log on to the Reading Rockets website and Google videos and see if you can see a teacher teaching in the classroom and start to figure out how you would describe their practice, because that's what we need to do as a foundation for how to then teach the teachers. If you could go to the next slide, Matt. So not only are practices learnable, we need to keep in mind that we're not just teaching people these rote practices. We're trying to teach them in increasingly complex settings how they can be refined over time. And Amber's going to talk about scaffolding, I think, later. And this idea is very connected to this idea of scaffolding that you will hear next. If you could go to the next slide, Matt. Oops, you didn't get my new slides. So let me just say this as a segue into what Amber's going to talk about before we do this participant poll. The other thing that we have to keep in mind, practices are learnable. They can be refined over time. But practice will not be effective, and we won't be able to leverage it unless it has some high quality features. And that's something that Amber's going to talk about, and then Louise is going to talk about how she has operationalized those features in a really wonderful opportunity that she has. But right now, let's take a look at this poll, because this is getting somewhat at what states might be able to do. And so I want to ask you, which of these things have you instituted in your state?
Okay, so on this next poll, the question was to support a statewide effort for implementing practice-based approaches to inclusive teaching. Our state has, and the poll results are none of the above, 45%, supports to improve teacher faculty knowledge and skill, 26%, ensure that new teachers have plenty of opportunities with students with disabilities, 21%, and instituted policies for mentor teachers in instructing students with disabilities, 9%. Thank you for your participation in that poll. That provides great information. Mary, did you want to add anything or make another comment about the poll?
Well, I just think the first three items are some things that you might want to start thinking about in your work to improve preparation from the Department of Ed level. So I'll just leave it at that, and we can answer questions later.
Mary, there's one question that came into the question pod that I would like to pose to you right now. Okay. This question is, are there variables within the novice category? For example, it seems to me that the role of life experience and personal history seems to impact problem solving and flexibility among novices, wouldn't they? Also, what about dispositions?
Well, as I mentioned before, if you have been a student who's been able to observe, as in your K through 12 experiences, a lot of effective teaching, or maybe even in your university experiences, a lot of effective teaching, then you have come to the table, and some high school students have done some tutoring work. So you're not coming to the table in under quite the same set of circumstances as some other novices might be. But as a general rule, unless you've had a lot of time to practice your knowledge, you're not going to be as flexible in applying it. So I don't know that we can depend on people coming into preparation training with a certain set of knowledge in place.
Okay, and it looks like the folks at JCPS loved your novice slide. So I just wanted to let you know that. Thanks, Mary. We'll now transition to Amber.
Thank you. Once teacher educators have determined what core curriculum is important for their candidates to master, they must consider effective approaches for teaching this core curriculum to their candidates. As many of you are aware, the research base underlying teacher preparation is relatively thin. Fortunately, teacher educators can draw from over 125 years of research in cognitive and developmental psychology to support us in translating cognitive science into educational science, allowing us to enhance our understanding of how adults master complex knowledge and skills. This translation results in the identification of 6 key features of deliberate or high-quality practice that can be used to help teacher educators structure practice-based experiences within teacher preparation programs. These features include modeling, spaced learning, varied learning, coaching and feedback, analysis and reflection, and scaffolding. The first feature is modeling. Modeling through demonstration, video, or verbal think-alouds is how teacher educators make concrete what expert performance looks like in action. Think-alouds or verbal protocol methods can be useful in making the cognitive processes underlying instructional practices explicit, so that they can be observed, enacted, and ultimately practiced by teacher candidates. The next essential feature is spaced learning. Many programs deal with content serially. They cover one topic at a time, move on to the next, and so on. Spaced repetition of content is a strategy teacher educators can employ that allows for them to spread the study of content over time, returning to it periodically, supporting candidates in remembering it better. Varied learning is the third feature showcased on this slide. Tied closely to spaced learning, varied learning is when teacher educators vary or interleave the practice of different skills in different environments for their teacher candidates over time. This approach has demonstrated to support individuals in learning skills better than if they were practicing them one at a time and in a sequence. Our fourth essential feature is coaching and feedback. Coaching and feedback supports teacher candidates in understanding what effective instruction looks and feels like when they are engaging in it, while guiding candidates in continued attempts for mastery. Analysis and reflection is our fifth feature of high-quality practice. This feature involves retrieving knowledge and practice from memory, connecting these to new experiences, and visualizing and mentally rehearsing what you might do differently next time in the future. Finally, scaffolding is our final feature comprising high-quality practice. Teacher educators must gauge candidates' current abilities with respect to what they expect to do to implement complex instructional practices by breaking down an activity into manageable tasks. Within the policy brief, we showcase teacher educators engaged in scholarship around practice-based approaches that operationalize these essential features of high-quality practice that can be integrated within both campus-based coursework and field-based experiences. For the purpose of time, we will highlight 3 of these approaches, with the first being virtual simulation. The use of virtual simulation is gradually gaining traction in the area of teacher preparation, largely due to Dr. Lisa Deeker and her colleagues at the University of Central Florida around the use of Teach Live. In this approach, 3D online worlds are used to simulate classroom experiences for teacher candidates, allowing candidates to practice teaching before instructing in front of actual children. Video analysis is another prevalent practice-based approach used by teacher preparation programs. In several studies, researchers have shown that analysis of video models can support teacher candidates in learning to recognize student misconceptions and actually develop more effective instructional skills. Within the brief, we showcase Dr. Adria Hoffman at the University of Virginia and her use of My Pre-Teaching Partner, an approach that couples video analysis with individualized coaching. The final practical example we showcase in today's webinar is coaching. Studies demonstrate that coaching supports candidates' implementation of effective instruction. Within the policy brief, we draw attention to bug-in-the-ear coaching and a body of research developed by Dr. Marcia Rock at UNC Greensboro. She and her colleagues use a Bluetooth device to provide candidates immediate, in-time support with improving instruction and behavior management strategies during the act of teaching. This approach stimulates candidates to engage in reflective practice while they are teaching, fostering a more analytical perspective in their instruction. Now, before we learn from Dr. Louise Spear-Swerling about her experiences integrating these essential features into a structured tutoring experience, I'm interested to learn from you the following poll. In your role, indicate which of the following practice-based opportunities you are currently implementing or are aware of in your preparation program. Please take a moment to respond. This is great. So 66% of our group is using video analysis, 66% coaching, 58% is using lesson study, 11% virtual simulation. Oh, and tutoring is also a big part of this approach. Thank you so much. And next, we'll hear from Louise.
Hello, everybody. I'm going to talk today about a course in which I use a supervised math tutoring experience for teacher candidates that I've been implementing for about 15 to 20 years, but that has evolved quite a bit over time. So if you could advance to the next slide, please. First, I'd like to start with an overview of where the supervised math tutoring fits into students' other field experiences. So the program in which this experience occurs is the undergraduate comprehensive K-12 special education program, and also collaborative students who become dually certified in both elementary and special education take this course. But they start with classroom observations. They also do a parallel supervised tutoring experience for reading. These are initial experiences, is how they are conceived of within the program. And then later on in the program, they will do a small group supervised experience. So they have to deal not just one-to-one with children, but with a small group of children. And that also includes collaboration with peers. And then, of course, student teaching. Next slide, please. Again, I'm going to concentrate on the math experience and math course. And this is actually a course that combines content knowledge about basic assessment and as it is applied to math. So the first 7 to 8 weeks of the semester are spent with pedagogical content knowledge about basic assessment techniques in math. So examples of the types of assessment content that's covered includes types and purposes of assessment, the usefulness of CBM in screening and progress monitoring, ethical considerations in assessment, things like that. The math content includes important components of math, such as fact fluency, procedural knowledge, problem solving, the role of automaticity and fluency in overall math achievement, general education expectations for math, such as the Common Core standards, common reasons why children have difficulty in math, In terms of intervention, there's a heavy emphasis on the value of explicit systematic instruction and also on the value of manipulatives and visual representations, especially for teaching concepts such as base 10 or what a fraction is and so on. And then before the teacher candidates actually start their field work, they have opportunities to practice their math assessments in class with a peer, with a classmate. And the math assessments, some of the math assessments are provided to the students, but they are also expected to develop some of those assessments themselves with guidance from the course instructor. Next slide. So the field experience begins about week 8 of the semester, so right around midterms. This is a Tuesday, Thursday class, so for the second half of the course, we spend one class session per week at a local K-8 magnet school, and one session continues at the university where the students continue to learn content. The fieldwork children that we serve are usually in grades 3 to 5. All field sessions are supervised on site by the course instructor, so the instructor who's teaching the content knowledge is also going on site to do the tutoring experience, to supervise the tutoring experience with the students, with the teacher candidates. In general, there are about 8 field sessions in total. The candidates spend 1 to 2 sessions on formative assessment, and then they have about 6 to 7 tutoring sessions with the children. And the assignments for the candidates include a diagnostic report. This would be a report that describes the child's strengths and weaknesses in math based on the assessments and makes recommendations for what the tutoring needs to focus on. They're expected to do lesson plans for each tutoring session, to set goals and objectives for the student, to write reflections after each tutoring session, and then at the very end, they do a brief final summary report, and they put all of these assignments into a portfolio. Next slide. So examples of high leverage practices that are developed by this field experience are being able to explain or model important math content and strategies, being able to elicit and interpret children's thinking, being able to diagnose common patterns of thinking or common errors. So for example, in problem solving, candidates learn and actually see with the children they're working with for, say, subtraction comparison word problems, that children tend to be confused by the wording, like how many more, and so they want to add instead of subtract, or common errors such as children being confused by zeros in a calculation example. Also adjusting instruction during a lesson, building respectful relationships with a student, setting long-term and short-term goals and objectives. The long-term goals, they don't have enough time with the children to really set the kind of long-term goals you would normally set in special education, but they do that as sort of a practice exercise. And then the short-term goals and objectives they do actually implement as part of their lessons. They have to design single lessons and sequences of lessons, check student understanding, interpret student work, provide oral feedback, and analyze instruction for the purpose of improving it. Next slide. So some features of effective practice that Amber spoke about earlier that are embedded in this field experience include spaced learning. So tutoring sessions are spaced across about 6 weeks, and candidates do have opportunities to grow and develop as teachers. The course instructor provides modeling in class and also for individual candidates during tutoring sessions. So I always let candidates know that sometimes a model is worth 1,000 words. So sometimes when I'm observing them with their child in tutoring, I'll just jump in and model something for them. And the candidates get used to that, and they see me doing that with all of them. So they're very comfortable with that, and I find that actually works pretty well. They certainly get a lot of explicit coaching and feedback that's provided to candidates not only during the tutoring sessions, but also in a short class debriefing after tutoring. So that's usually only 5 or 10 minutes, but I use that time if I see, you know, repeated types of difficulties that multiple candidates are having, or just things that I want to draw their attention to. Next slide, please. Scaffolding occurs across the 6 tutoring sessions, and most candidates do become increasingly independent over time. Analyzing and reflecting occurs through the candidates' reflections, at least in part through those. And many years ago, when I first started implementing the tutoring experience, I accepted very free-form types of reflections, and I would get lots of reflections that said things like, oh, the session was wonderful, I wouldn't change a thing. And so now I'm much more specific in what I request from candidates. So I ask that they address specific points, such as how well did the pacing go, was the child reasonably engaged, what were the most and least successful activities, were objectives generally met or not met, and some specific improvements for the next session. Next slide. So some benefits of organizing field experience in this way. One is that there's a very high degree of coherence between the course content knowledge that candidates learn and the field application. So I think this makes the course content learning much more meaningful for the candidates. And it also, to sort of jump to the bottom bullet there, I think it also provides the course instructor with a much more complete picture of candidate skills, because the person who's teaching the content knowledge is the same person who's actually observing the candidate with children. And one of the things, for example, that you sometimes see is a student with more modest academic abilities in the university classroom has a real gift with children, and makes you really want to nurture that person. And sometimes it's, in my experience, it's more rare, but sometimes you see the opposite of people who are strong academically, but they're not really wonderful with children. And so it's also an opportunity to intervene with those candidates, or if necessary, counsel them out. I think also the tutoring experience does facilitate the development of important teaching competencies, such as the ones mentioned earlier. Next slide. There's also some important challenges, though, of organizing the field work in this way. So one challenge is keeping the class section sizes small enough for meaningful supervision. The current max for this particular course is 16. Most semesters, I'm close to the max for the class. I would say ideal numbers would be closer to 12. More than 16 is really almost impossible to do the supervision the way I would want it. Finding enough time for content coverage is always really a challenge. Finding schools near campus with the space to accommodate 16 candidates at once. So everybody's going in at the same time, 16 teacher candidates, plus they're pulling 16 children for tutoring. So we need a school with enough space to accommodate that many people at once, not to mention the willingness to schedule around the same time that the course is offered. Occasionally we have problems with weak candidates who cannot be counseled out easily prior to the start of tutoring, because everything is combined within the course. So for example, if you split the pedagogical content knowledge and the tutoring across 2 courses, then you could require that students achieve a certain grade in the first part before they are allowed to go out and do the tutoring in the second part. But when you're combining it all in one course, occasionally, it doesn't happen a lot, but occasionally I have a student who is very weak that I'm not comfortable placing for tutoring, but who is not willing to drop the course. And then achieving consistency across different course sections. So those taught in the evening where it's not really feasible to go into a school, or taught by adjuncts is another challenge. Next slide. But nevertheless, I think overall this is a very useful approach as one approach for implementing clinical field experiences. So it looks like we have another participant poll here. I would like to see my college state implement more practice-based approaches to teacher education that focus on inclusive teaching for students with disabilities, but the following are barriers.
Okay, unfortunately, we had some technical difficulty with this poll not allowing participants to respond, but that is something we'd like for you to think about. And if you do have comments related to this poll, please feel free to add those in the question pod, and we'll make sure that we're addressing those. There was one comment or question related to virtual simulations and the cost. Lynn, did you have any insights related to how folks who might want to use virtual simulations or who are using it and are concerned about the cost can address that?
Yeah, maybe I can kick it off, and then I'll turn it over to Mary and Louise to add in from an educator preparation program perspective. But from my perspective, in seeing opportunities across local districts, state education agencies, and educator preparation programs in terms of partnerships, I think that there's an opportunity to go into the virtual simulation conversation in a strategic partnership to utilize it to both prepare and serve in an in-service capacity, and further supporting teacher capacity to work in certain contexts and situations around professional learning, et cetera. And there's some opportunities within ESSA and the consolidated planning and leveraging some of the funds out of Title IIA to do this kind of professional learning, because it's tied to obviously retention and teacher success and ensuring that they are equipped with the skills and opportunities to really hone in a practice. So we might need to think a little bit more creatively about some of the costs that might encounter, and that it wouldn't necessarily need to be on the onus of just the educator preparation program alone. I'm not naive, I'm not saying that's easy, but I would try to push all of our participants to really think through how you can strengthen these partnerships that you all share in the investment and the utilization of something like virtual simulation. And there are some opportunities within the ESSA plans, ESSA Part 2, where the local districts can maybe leverage their funds that way and create a partnership to do some in-service professional learning using the avatar situation or the virtual simulations. But there is also opportunities for state to engage, because the state can elect to use some of that ESSA Part 2 funding to do more statewide initiatives. So I'll push it out there as an innovative way to think about how to fund this. But perhaps Mary and Louise can talk more specifically from an educator preparation program perspective.
I want to acknowledge that if you work, with some of the virtual simulation programs that are out there, particularly the ones that are mixed reality, where there's a combination of human actors and avatars, I know they're expensive. They do bring teacher skill up more quickly than a lot of other types of learning opportunities. So that might be a consideration. What Lynn is saying about partnerships is definitely important as a way to share the cost. But you might not be thinking about this. A lot of universities allow you to charge lab costs. And so as part of your program, if you're going to use Teach Live, you might want to think about, can you use lab fees to help defray some of the costs in addition to what Lynn is talking about? So that might be a specific strategy you can use.
Louise, did you want to add anything to that?
Basically, I agree with the points that have been made. At my institution, we are not using this yet, to my knowledge, and I do think cost would be an issue. But I think some of the suggestions that have been mentioned could be, very helpful to explore.
Similarly, we had a question about the ATLAS system from the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards. Are you familiar? Is any one of our presenters familiar with that?
I am. You can get in, and it's pretty interesting. And you can watch videos of different types of instruction. I need to be honest that I wasn't completely comfortable with some of the special ed instruction that I saw. However, having said that, it is a point for talking about the instruction, how it could be improved, and thinking about ideas that you saw that you would like to apply as a pre-service candidate, teacher candidate, in your own practice. So I think there's some value to getting people to analyze performance. I will say we have taught teachers to do this, practicing teachers to self-analyze their performance, and it did impact their ability to become more critical about their instruction. So if you have instructional rubrics, you could get in and really take a look at the instruction. The other thing that I think is really informative, and I just took a group through this activity, is to watch, especially if you're working on dual certification or really trying to amp up your general ed teachers to ability to engage in better instruction. I watched with a group a very high quality video of a teacher who I thought was pretty solid in terms of her general ed instruction, but there were really things she needed to do to provide stronger instruction for kids that were struggling in the classroom. And it provided a great space for talking about the specifics of that. And I think when we're working with pre-service teachers or practicing teachers, we need to get down to the details of instruction, because that's what really helps them to learn. They have to develop an image in their mind of how they're going to respond to instructional scenarios. I don't know if anybody wants to add anything to that.
Mary, I'm not going to add much more other than that. In the brief that you all have a link to, and we can put another link into the chat box so it's clearly there for you for the brief, on page 12 there is a link to the Atlas. And I also, Erica's going to post the link in the chat box as well, but we did reference those videos within the resource, so in case anybody's looking for it.
Okay, I don't see any other questions or comments in the question box at this time. There is a related comment saying, thank you about your feedback on Atlas and the videos, and that it would be great if someone with special education expertise could improve these videos or add new videos, especially for dual certification candidates.
Eric, I'm wondering, since we have a little bit of time, I would love to see a little bit of engagement around, and maybe Mary and Louise and Amber want to chime in here, but what are some, just looking at who's participating and so forth and some of the questions we've seen thus far, what are some things that we could recommend collectively from all of our different lenses on strategies to start to move this forward? I mean, it looks like everybody, 92% of us indicated that, we felt like these practice-based opportunities are real important. We heard one thing as a cost being a hiccup, potentially finding good local partners and also field experiences could be another hiccup. But mostly, like maybe Louise or Amber, I know you did a lot of the interviews on some of this work. Are there insights that we can provide to our participants today to get started and help move it, and some barriers that they might anticipate or help mitigate in getting it started?
Yeah, can I respond quickly to that? Because I did say I'd come back to partnerships. I'm glad you reminded me to do that. One, I think, is getting a hold of the rubric, and as a program or even an entire teacher education set of programs, starting to take a look at to what degree are we really doing this already? Because you might find, oh, we're doing some things here, but they haven't been coordinated. And so you could improve the cohesiveness aspect. The other thing, and I would really encourage this at a state level, is a very serious conversation about sort of what are the high leverage practices and key evidence-based practices we really want all our teachers to have a serious command of. And I would encourage us to think about a limited set. So that programs, and involving programs in that, so they could, and local school district leaders really come to some agreement about what it is that they're focusing on. I think that it would be very helpful, for one, in laying some foundation for partnership. The other thing that I want to suggest, because I've seen people do this, I don't think we can wait for the perfect mentor teachers to arrive. We've had this problem for a long time, and so, you know, I think we could put in place strategies for getting the best teachers on board. But I have watched institutions reach out to a district and then agree on some things that both the pre-service and in-service practicing teachers are going to work on together. And I actually know that one of our Cedar schools, Kent State, is doing this. And so I would suggest moving ahead with sort of a well-defined learning opportunity that would be reinforcing for the district, but also reinforcing for the university, and maybe touch on some key things that they're really worried about their practicing teachers not having, and that they'd love to see beginning teachers have too, so that they're in a situation where they're really learning together, and then the university and the district are, and this could happen at a distance. You could pick a district at a distance who really is a high-need district and start working together on how to practice these opportunities simultaneously. And you could use a lot of video conferencing, planning. I mean, there's ways to do this that I think we don't always think about that gets around some of the challenges that we find when we try to get good mentors. And I don't know, Louise, Amber, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think, you know, you're right. If we wait for the perfect mentor teachers, nothing ever gets done. And also a lot of this kind of work, it's sort of mutually reinforcing, right? So you start working with people at a school and, you know, you develop a relationship, and so you get kind of a mutually reinforcing, you know, virtuous cycle when all goes well. I mean, the other thing I would say about this is I think in terms of having good clinical experiences, you need sort of both, at least what my experience has been, is that you need both top-down and bottom-up types of things. So top-down is the policy, the, you know, state, and other sort of, you know, having people at the university and offices that do provide supports for faculty. But I have to say my own experience has been, all my field experiences have been very bottom up. They've grown out of my relationship with a principal or, you know, reading supervisor or somebody like that at a school and saying, hey, what about if we did, you know, what if we develop some sort of experience for teacher candidates that would also help the kids? The problem with that, if you only do that, is it's not very sustainable. So you need the top-down piece too.
Okay, we've had
and I just want to add to that. I think both Mary and Louise, you're calling out something critically important about those established relationships and a shared need and desire and how it grows over time. And I do think that there are some opportunities now in front of us to really hone in and create those. So, you know, starting small, going big, wherever you start. And I just think that there's so many opportunities now and interest in creating more partnership and leveraging funds across different programs, titles, and at different levels, that we should really think very creatively about how to leverage those partnerships we've already established to move it forward even broader.
Okay, we've had a couple of comments and questions, and we'd like to go ahead and wrap up in the interest of time. One comment was that the implementation science articles from Exceptional Children are great tools to share with teacher candidates. A couple of other questions were related to resources mentioned in the presentation, and we will include those in a follow-up email with a feedback survey. But one specific question, Louise, is if you're willing to share your course syllabus and assignments, because the participant said that they have a similar field experience course and definitely need to improve it.
Oh, sure, I'd be delighted to do that.
Okay. Thank you all for your time. Again, please look for that follow-up email. It will include some of the resources mentioned on today's presentation, a link to the archive if you'd like to share it, and information about upcoming webinars. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. It was fun. Thank you.